The starship Ecliptica floated in orbit over a swirling gas giant, its hull a masterpiece of galactic engineering. Its smooth metallic surface gleamed faintly under the distant starlight, betraying no sign of the relentless battles it had faced. Inside its cavernous interior, the mess hall was alive with chatter, laughter, and the occasional clanging of metallic trays against tables. For most recruits of the Galactic Vanguard Corps, this was a place to relax, to bond over shared victories and friendly rivalries. For Alex Carter, it was a gauntlet of humiliation. He sat at the farthest table, his back to the wall, picking at a nutrient bar that tasted as bland as it looked. The bar was meant to fuel soldiers with optimized precision, but it felt more like punishment. Around him, clusters of alien recruits from 100 different worlds were engrossed in their own conversations, at least until their attention inevitably turned to him. "I still can't believe they let that thing in here," Velkin said loudly, his voice cutting through the din like a blade. Velkin, a towering Zelthorian with iridescent blue scales and 4 muscular arms, was a natural-born warrior. His species' strength was legendary, and Velkin wore his superiority like a crown. He didn't even glance at Alex as he spoke. The insult was aimed at everyone else, an invitation to laugh. And they did. Creel, a wiry Mazarian with glowing, tri-colored eyes, leaned in conspiratorially. "Maybe they're testing a new definition of strength," he said with mock seriousness. "You know, like emotional resilience. Humans are supposed to be good at crying, right? Space is not such a bad thing." The table erupted into laughter, a discordant melody of alien tones and pitches. Alex clenched his jaw, willing himself not to react. His hand tightened around the nutrient bar until it cracked. He felt the heat of their gazes, the weight of their judgment. He was an outsider here, not just in species, but in every way that mattered. Earth wasn't known for its warriors or its technology. It wasn't even part of the core Galactic Alliance until recently, when a trade deal had secured its inclusion. The planet's one claim to fame was its resilience in surviving centuries of internal strife and environmental degradation. But resilience wasn't enough to impress the Vanguard Corps, the galaxy's most elite military force. Alex had volunteered to join, knowing full well what it meant to represent Earth. He had trained harder than he ever thought possible, pushed himself beyond limits he didn't know existed. Yet, here he was, a laughingstock among species that saw his entire world as a primitive backwater. "You okay, Earthling?" Velkar sneered, finally turning his attention to Alex. His scales caught the light, shimmering like polished armor. "You've been awfully quiet. Don't you have a witty comeback?" Alex forced himself to meet Velkin's gaze. "I'm just saving my energy," he said evenly. "Some of us need to train harder than others." The laughter faded slightly, replaced by a murmur of surprise. Velkin's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Alex thought he might stand up and escalate things. But then the Zelthorian smirked and turned away. "Keep telling yourself that, human. Maybe it'll help you sleep at night." As the mess hall returned to its usual chaos, Alex felt a pang of frustration. He wanted to fight back, to prove that he wasn't the weakling they thought he was. But he knew better. Words wouldn't change their minds. Actions would. That night, while the others rested, Alex made his way to the training bay. The vast room was filled with equipment tailored to dozens of different species, from gravity simulators to plasma weapon ranges. Most of it was far beyond what his body could handle. But Alex had learned to adapt. He started with the basics: strength training, agility drills, marksmanship. Every movement was precise, deliberate. His muscles screamed in protest, but he pushed through the pain. He couldn't match the raw power of a Zelthorian or the reflexes of a Feloran, but he could outwork them. He could study their techniques, learn their weaknesses, and find ways to compensate for his own limitations. Hours passed unnoticed as he repeated drills and ran simulations. By the time he returned to his quarters, his body was trembling with exhaustion, but his mind was clear. One day, he told himself, they'll see. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. The announcement came during the morning briefing, delivered by Commander Thalric, a no-nonsense Drexian with a voice like grinding stone. "Recruits," he began, his 4 eyes scanning the room. "Your next assignment is the trial of endurance. It will test your survival skills, adaptability, and teamwork. You will be dropped onto the jungle moon of Zeroth. Your objective is to complete a series of tasks while evading local predators. You have 3 days. Any questions?" The room buzzed with excitement. The trial of endurance was a rite of passage, the ultimate test for new recruits. Success meant earning respect and recognition. Failure meant disgrace, or worse. Alex's stomach churned. He had heard stories about Zeroth, a moon teeming with hostile wildlife and brutal terrain. Survival was a challenge, even for the galaxy's most advanced species. For a human, it bordered on impossible. "You'll be lucky to last an hour, Earthling," Falcon said as they prepared to board the transport shuttle. Alex ignored him, focusing on his gear. He had spent weeks customizing his standard-issue equipment, modifying the sensors and upgrading the weapon's targeting systems. It wasn't much, but it gave him a slight edge. The shuttle descended through Zeroth's dense atmosphere, shaking violently as it passed through turbulent air currents. When it finally landed, the recruits poured out, their boots sinking into the spongy ground. The jungle was alive with sound. Chirps, growls, and the rustling of unseen creatures. Alex took a deep breath and activated his scanner. The first objective was a navigation challenge. Reach a designated point on the other side of the jungle while avoiding detection by local predators. He primed his expectation to become the best in the world. The recruits scattered, each relying on their own abilities to complete the task. Alex moved cautiously, using the dense foliage for cover. He avoided the well-trodden paths, knowing they would attract the most attention. The jungle was unforgiving. Razor-sharp thorns tore at his uniform, and the humidity made every step a struggle. But Alex pressed on, using his knowledge of terrain and survival techniques to stay ahead. By the second night, he had completed 2 objectives and was preparing for the third when he heard a commotion nearby. Peering through the undergrowth, he saw Velkan and his team surrounded by a pack of Zyrathian stalkers. The creatures were almost invisible, their adaptive camouflage blending seamlessly with the jungle. Velkan's team was struggling, their weapons unable to lock on to the elusive predators. For a moment, Alex hesitated. He could leave them to their fate. It would be poetic justice for the months of ridicule he had endured. But something inside him refused to let go. He activated a sonic device he had cobbled together earlier, its high-frequency pulse disorienting the stalkers. The creatures fled, their screeches echoing through the jungle. Velkan stared at him, stunned. Why did you help us?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Alex shrugged. "Because I could," he said simply. Velkan didn't respond, but something in his expression shifted. The final day of the trial was the most grueling. The recruits faced an impossible task, crossing a ravine while under attack from automated drones. The drones were relentless, firing precision shots that forced the recruits to take cover. Chaos erupted as old rivalries flared and egos clashed. Teams dissolved into bickering, their progress stalled by infighting. Alex watched from the sidelines, frustration building. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "If we don't work together, we're all going to fail." To his surprise, the others listened. Alex quickly organized the group, assigning roles based on each recruit's strengths. The Zalthorians used their brute force to anchor the bridge, while the Philorans provided cover fire with their enhanced reflexes. Under Alex's leadership, the group moved with surprising efficiency. They completed the task just as the drones closed in, collapsing the bridge behind them to prevent pursuit. When they returned to the Ecliptica, even Velkin had to admit that Alex had earned his place. "You're not as weak as I thought, human," Velkan said grudgingly. He reached into his backpack. Alex smiled, his exhaustion forgotten. Thanks, Thank." From that day forward, the jokes stopped. The recruits had seen what true strength looked like. Resilience, ingenuity, and the ability to rise above pettiness. For the first time, Alex felt like he belonged. Earth was no longer a laughingstock, and neither was he. The announcement of the trial of endurance had left Alex in a strange limbo between dread and determination. His heart raced as the transport shuttle descended through Xyrith's thick, stormy atmosphere, its engines groaning under the strain. The jungle moon unfolded beneath them in a chaotic swirl of vibrant greens, jagged terrain, and rivers that shimmered like molten silver under the sun's dying light. The air inside the shuttle was tense, filled with the hum of weapons being checked and last-minute adjustments to gear. Alex was silent, eyes fixed on his equipment as he ensured every piece was ready. Beside him, Velkan adjusted the straps on his combat harness, his scales gleaming in the flickering light of the cabin. The Zalthorian glanced sideways, his expression a mix of contempt and amusement. "Look alive, Earthling," Velkan said with a smirk. "Or not. I guess it doesn't really matter since you'll be the first to go down." The others chuckled, a chorus of jeers that Alex had grown accustomed to. He didn't bother responding. Instead, he focused on calming his breathing. This wasn't the time to let his emotions take control. He had learned to channel the sting of their mockery into something productive. This trial would be no different. The shuttle jolted as it landed, the rear hatch hissing open to reveal the dense jungle. The air was thick and humid, laden with the sense of alien flora and the faint metallic tang of storm-laden winds. Commander Thalric's voice crackled over their comms. "Your objectives have been transmitted to your devices. You have 72 hours to complete the trial. Survive, adapt, and improvise." Dismissed. The recruits wasted no time dispersing into the jungle, each team moving with practiced precision, or in Alex's case, solitary determination. His strategy was simple: avoid the larger groups and rely on his own resourcefulness. He knew he couldn't compete with the others in raw power or speed, but he had spent weeks studying the terrain and preparing for every contingency. The jungle was alive with movement and sound, a symphony of rustling leaves, distant screeches, and the occasional guttural growl of unseen predators. Alex moved cautiously, his footsteps muffled by the spongy ground. He relied on his modified scanner to detect movement, using its low-frequency pings to map the area. His first objective was a navigation task, requiring him to reach a checkpoint marked by a beacon buried deep within the jungle. The path was anything but straightforward. He encountered towering trees with razor-sharp leaves, carnivorous plants that snapped at anything within reach, and rivers teeming with bioluminescent serpents. Each obstacle tested his ingenuity and resolve. By the end of the first day, Alex had reached the beacon and completed the task, but his body was already protesting. His muscles ached, and the oppressive heat made every breath a struggle. He set up a small shelter using a thermal blanket and camouflage netting, eating a ration bar while monitoring the scanner for nearby threats. As he rested, he thought about Earth. Back home, he had always been underestimated, even before joining the Vanguard Corps. His decision to enlist had been met with skepticism and derision. "What's the point?" they had asked. Earth isn't a player in the galactic stage, you'll just embarrass yourself." He clenched his fists, the memory fueling his determination. He wasn't just here for himself. He was here to prove that humans could rise to the occasion, that they had something to offer, even in a galaxy full of advanced civilizations. He recalled one remarkable example of this from earlier in his travels. The second day began with a storm rolling in, dark clouds blotting out the sky and drenching the jungle in torrential rain. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the ground turned into a treacherous mess of mud and slippery roots. Alex pushed forward, using the weather to his advantage. He knew the predators of Xyrath were less active during storms, their senses dulled by the heavy rain. His second objective was a retrieval mission, requiring him to secure an artifact hidden in a cave system at the base of the cliff. The climb was arduous, the slick rock face offering little in the way of footholds. By the time he reached the cave, his fingers were raw and his breathing was ragged. The artifact was guarded by a Xyrathian sentinel, a territorial creature with 6 legs, armored plating, and an array of bioluminescent eyes. Alex didn't stand a chance against it in a direct confrontation. Instead, he used his surroundings, setting up a series of traps with scavenged materials. It took hours of careful maneuvering, but eventually the sentinel was lured into a pitfall, its enraged roars echoing through the cave as Alex retrieved the artifact and slipped away. As he made his way back to the surface, he heard voices in the distance. He crept closer, keeping to the shadows. It was Velkan's team, surrounded by a pack of Xyrathian stalkers. The creatures were nearly invisible, their adaptive camouflage blending seamlessly with the jungle. Velkan and his team were cornered, their weapons ineffective against the predator's speed and stealth. Alex hesitated, his mind racing. He could leave them to their fate. After all, they had done nothing but mock him since the moment he arrived. But as much as he wanted to, he couldn't bring himself to abandon them. He activated a sonic emitter he had rigged earlier, its high-frequency pulse disorienting the stalkers. The creatures retreated, their screeches fading into the distance. Velkan turned to him, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. You saved us?" Alex shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "Don't read too much into it. I just didn't want to deal with your whining later." Velkan didn't respond immediately, but something in his demeanor shifted. For the first time, the mocking edge in his voice was absent. The third day brought the final and most grueling challenge. The recruits were tasked with crossing a ravine while under attack from automated drones programmed to target anything that moved. The drones were relentless, their energy blasts cutting through the dense foliage with deadly precision. The recruits were in disarray, their earlier confidence shattered by the relentless assault. Arguments broke out as egos clashed, each recruit insisting on their own plan. Alex watched from the sidelines, his frustration growing. He knew they wouldn't make it if they kept this up. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. "Listen to me," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "If we keep fighting each other, we're all going to fail. We need to work together." His words were met with skepticism, but desperation won out. Slowly, the recruits began to listen. Alex quickly formulated a plan, assigning roles based on each recruit's unique abilities. Velkan and the other Zalthorians anchored the makeshift bridge with their brute strength, while the Felerons provided cover fire with their enhanced reflexes. Alex coordinated the effort, his voice steady and commanding. Despite the relentless assault, the group moved with surprising efficiency, completing the task just as the drones closed in. They collapsed the bridge behind them, cutting off pursuit. By the time they returned to the Ecliptica, the recruits were battered and exhausted, but victorious. Even Velkan had to admit that Alex had earned his place among them. "You're tougher than I thought, human," Velka said grudgingly. Alex smiled faintly, his exhaustion giving way to a quiet sense of pride. From that day forward, the tone among the recruits shifted. The mocking laughter was replaced with respect, and Alex finally felt like he belonged. He had proven that strength wasn't just about muscle or speed. It was about resilience, ingenuity, and the ability to rise above adversity. For the first time, Alex felt like he had truly earned his place in the galaxy. And for the first time, Earth was no longer seen as a laughingstock. The aftermath of the trial of endurance was a strange blend of relief and reflection for Alex. The jungle moon of Zyrath had tested him in ways he hadn't fully anticipated, forcing him to dig deeper than ever into his reserves of courage and ingenuity. Back aboard the Ecliptica, the recruits had dispersed to their quarters, weary but triumphant. For the first time since his arrival, Alex walked the corridors without the familiar weight of ridicule hanging over him. Velkin's begrudging acknowledgement still echoed in his mind. It wasn't an apology, and Alex didn't expect one, but it was something, a crack in the armor of disdain that had surrounded his fellow recruits. Respect wasn't given freely among the Vanguard Corps. It had to be earned, sometimes clawed for, and Alex had done that. The mess hall was quieter than usual, a reflection of the exhaustion from the trial. Alex entered, half expecting the usual barrage of side glances and mocking whispers, but the atmosphere had changed. Velkin sat at his usual table with his squad mates, their conversation subdued. When Alex passed, Velkin met his eyes briefly and gave a slight nod, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. Alex didn't react outwardly, but the gesture lit a small flame of satisfaction in his chest. As he settled into his seat, Creel approached, holding a tray of food. The wiry Metzarian paused, his glowing tricolored eyes scanning Alex with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. "Mind if I join you?" Creel asked, his tone devoid of its usual mockery. Alex raised an eyebrow but gestured to the seat across from him. Creel sat down, setting his tray down with meticulous care. For a moment, neither spoke. Alex ate quietly, waiting to see what Creel wanted. "You know," Creel began, breaking the silence, "when you activated that sonic device back on Zyrath, you saved Velkin's hide, and the rest of us for that matter." Alex looked up, his expression neutral. "I remember." Creel chuckled, a faint hum in his alien throat. "Most wouldn't have bothered. You had every reason to leave us to fend for ourselves, especially after the way we treated you." Alex leaned back slightly, setting down his utensil. "You're right. I did. I'm..." Creel tilted his head, waiting for Alex to continue. "But I didn't," Alex said simply, "because what's the point of proving myself if I let it turn me into someone I don't want to be?" Creel's three eyes blinked in unison, a gesture Alex had learned to interpret as surprise. The Metzarian nodded slowly, as if weighing Alex's words. Alex said something. "That's not what I expected," Creel admitted. "But maybe that's why you managed to pull everyone together during the ravine crossing. Velkan said he'd follow your lead again if it came to it." Alex couldn't hide his surprise at that. "Velkan said that?" "Don't let it go to your head," Creel replied with a smirk. "But yeah, he did. That's not something he says lightly. You've earned a place here, Alex, whether you believe it or not." The words struck a chord. For so long, Alex had felt like an imposter, a lone representative of a species that most of the galaxy saw as inconsequential. To hear that he was starting to earn their respect was both validating and humbling. Over the next few weeks, the shift in dynamics became more apparent. Training exercises became more collaborative, with Alex's input sought rather than dismissed. During one particularly grueling simulation, Alex's quick thinking helped his team disable a series of automated turrets that had pinned them down, earning praise even from Commander Thaurek. But respect among the Vanguard Corps wasn't a one-and-done affair. Every day brought new challenges, new opportunities to prove that his success on Xyrath wasn't a fluke. The next major mission was a live deployment to a contested planet near the fringes of Alliance space. A rogue faction had taken control of a research facility, and the Vanguard Corps had been tasked with reclaiming it. The mission briefing outlined the risks: fortified enemy positions, unpredictable terrain, and the possibility of experimental weapons being deployed against them. As the recruits prepared, Alex felt the weight of the mission settling on his shoulders. This wasn't a trial or a simulation. Lives were at stake, and failure wasn't an option. The drop pod rumbled as it descended through the planet's atmosphere, the sound of turbulence mingling with the rhythmic thud of Alex's heartbeat. He gripped the harness tightly, his knuckles white. Across from him, Velkan sat with his usual confidence, though his expression was more focused than usual. "Get close, Earthling," Velkan said, his tone lacking its usual edge. "This isn't Xyrath. Out here, hesitation will get you killed." Alex met his gaze and nodded. "Same goes for you." The pod landed with a jarring impact, the doors hissing open to reveal a battlefield in chaos. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and ozone, the distant crackle of gunfire underscored by the occasional explosion. The team moved quickly, spreading out to secure the area. Alex followed Velkan, his weapon at the ready. The rogue faction soldiers were well equipped, their tactics surprisingly coordinated. It was clear they weren't just a ragtag group of rebels. They had training and resources, making the mission even more dangerous. As they advanced, Alex's scanner picked up a cluster of heat signatures moving toward their position. "Incoming!" he shouted, diving for cover as energy blasts rained down on their location. 4 hours later, Alex landed to find all 5 of his men sitting in a framed tent around a 4-pronged table. The team returned fire, Velkan's heavy repeater cutting through the enemy ranks, while Alex provided support with precise shots. The skirmish was intense, every second a battle for survival. When the enemy finally retreated, Alex's squad regrouped. Velkan approached him, his scales streaked with soot. Behind him, the other squads followed. "Nice work back there," Velkan said, clapping Alex on the shoulder. "You've got good instincts." Alex nodded, his breathing still uneven from the fight. "Thanks, but this isn't over yet." The mission continued, each objective bringing new challenges. When they finally reached the research facility, they found it heavily fortified. The team devised a plan to infiltrate the building, using a combination of stealth and diversionary tactics. Alex was tasked with disabling the facility's power grid, a critical step in neutralizing the enemy's defenses. Navigating the labyrinthine corridors, he relied on his scanner and his growing confidence in his own abilities. When he reached the power core, he encountered unexpected resistance, a squad of enemy soldiers guarding the control panel. The ensuing firefight was brutal, but Alex's determination carried him through. With the power grid disabled, the rest of the team stormed the facility, overwhelming the remaining defenders. By the time the mission was complete, the Vanguard Corps had secured a decisive victory. As they prepared to leave the planet, Commander Thalric addressed the recruits. "You've all proven yourselves today," Thalric said, his gravelly voice carrying over the comms. "But one of you stood out. Carter, your actions were instrumental in the success of this mission. You've earned the respect of your peers and your commanders. Well done." Alex felt a surge of pride, tempered by the weight of the responsibility he now carried. He had proven himself once again, but he knew there would always be more to prove. As the Ecliptica departed the planet, Alex found himself standing on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Velkan joined him, the two standing in companionable silence. "You've come a long way, Earthling," Velkan said finally. Alex smiled faintly. "Thanks, Velkan. That means a lot." Velkan grunted, crossing his arms. "Don't let it go to your head. You still have a lot to learn." Alex nodded, So do you. Velkin chuckled, the sound surprisingly warm. Fair enough. They talked for maybe half an hour, after which he headed for his truck. For the first time, Alex felt like he wasn't just a recruit struggling to prove himself. He was a member of the Vanguard Corps, part of something larger than himself. And for the first time, he felt like he belonged.